Hi there, everyone. This is Adam here with another community awareness podcast. One of our many that we're doing lately to support the young people that are going to be with us for the NCS in the digital format going forward. I'm pleased to say I've got Dave here from Eaaa.
Hello there.
Hi. The history of sort of Eaaa goes really far back for me because I worked with a project called Youth Action before Here to Listen, and I worked with, I think, someone called Kate, and that was a couple of years, I think, that we did. The project was designed around supporting young people into volunteering, so that was a good connection there. And then when I came to Here to Listen, I understand that they had been involved in community awareness days before, but maybe not the more recent ones. I think because there was some changes in delivery areas or something like that. I'm not really sure. But yeah, it's kind of good to sort of have you back with us, I would say. With the podcast, they mostly follow a similar format. So I'll begin by just asking you a little bit about the organisation, and perhaps you can say a little bit about what your role is in the organisation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no worries. Thank you very much, Adam. So my name is David Killingback. I'm a paramedic with the East Anglian Air Ambulance. I've been doing this role for coming up to about a year now. But prior to that, I've been a paramedic with the local ambulance service for, since 2007. So getting on quite a while now. The air ambulance obviously is a regional service that covers Norfolk, Suffolk, Essex, and Hertfordshire and Bedfordshire. And we obviously respond to the sickest patients that are kind of triaged by the ambulance service, and we respond to them both by a helicopter that flies and also by a rapid response car. We have one helicopter based in Norwich, but more importantly for you guys down in Bedfordshire, it's the Cambridge one that would probably come out and see you guys as well. It's tasked, as I said, to kind of go to the most critically unwell patients throughout the day and also the night time. So one of the main advantages with Cambridge, where we're flying at the moment, is that we respond right the way up until midnight, and we're the only air ambulance in the region that does night flying at present. And that's basically it. It's a charity, as you quite rightly said, Adam, so we receive no government funding at all, and each helicopter mission, in fact there's one just coming back now, the helicopter's literally just landed as we're talking, so that's just cost the charity £3,500, so each mission costs £3,500 to fly. And as we don't get any government funding, as you quite rightly said, we are obviously reliant on volunteers and charitable donations to keep the service going.
When you said about the most critically needing people, where would be the threshold? Where do you sort of cut it off, and when is it like your responsibility?
So really interesting question. So basically, as part of my role, as well as actually doing all the Gucci parts of flying on the air ambulance and dealing with the casualties, as a paramedic, part of my role involves going into the control rooms. So the regional control rooms for this area are Bedfordshire, in Bedford, Norwich has got one for Norfolk, and Chelmsford has got one for Essex. And my responsibility when I go into the control room as part of my rotation is to try and find the calls that are appropriate for the 6 or so different air ambulances that we have available. So it's worth mentioning, as well as us covering Norfolk, Cambridge, Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire area, there's also Essex Air Ambulance which do the same, and Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire Air Ambulance do the same. So we all kind of overlap and kind of cover each other's patches when each other one's busy, as well as MAGPAS based up in Witton as well. So in total, there's up to sometimes 6 teams available for the most critically unwell patients. And as I said, as part of my role, it's kind of listening into the calls as they're coming into the 999 control room. speaking to the ambulance crews direct. So obviously a lot of the time the ambulance will actually get there first. We'll be able to speak to the crews directly and find out exactly what's going on before deciding whether they may need a bit of extra help or support. So yeah, there's some thresholds, as you talked about, where it's an immediate send. So if I've sat in the control room and I see something come in and it automatically gets the hairs on my neck kind of standing up, then I can make the decision to send the helicopter straight away. Sometimes if I'm a little bit, I'm not sure this could be dealt with by the normal ambulance or not, I'll speak to the ambulance crew while they're on the way and then re-interrogate them later. So once they've arrived and they've made an assessment, I can make contact with the ambulance crew and ask them whether there's any benefit they think for the helicopter kind of arriving. And the third way that we can do it is actually speak to the person who's making the 999 call. So if you were to find someone collapsed in the street and to phone for an ambulance, once you've finished with the control operator getting all of the address information, I might take over the call and try and triage the call whilst the ambulance is on the way. And based on the information I'm kind of gathering out of you, may then make the decision to send straight away on that. So we either have an immediate send, we have an interrogated send, or we have kind of a crew request. They're the three ways that all the different air ambulance teams get mobilised throughout the region.
As you went through that, there was a touch of like anxiety for me, because I'm one for like second guessing myself and like have a lot of uncertainty about whether things the right decision or not. You seem quite relaxed about that.
You're right. So it can be hard because you do have a limited amount of resources and you do have to make tough decisions on who gets the air ambulance and who doesn't sometimes. But also, I guess you're right in the back of your mind. From what I said earlier, it's £3,500 every time that helicopter lifts from the pad, and ideally you don't want for it to get 5 minutes down the road or 5 minutes into the air and then find out actually it's not as given, and we can stand the ambulance down and it can return. We do still have quite a high stand down rate. So every task that we get sent out on doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to get there, and that's reflected by some of the stats of actual missions. So for instance, in 2018 and 19 we attended 2,821 missions, but we only got to and treated 1,664 patients. So there is a stand down rate. It's not obviously a science, but you have to, like you said, a lot of it's done on kind of experience and kind of gut feeling as well, which is quite hard to kind of explain. But you're right, you do second guess yourself a lot and think, blimey, have I made the right decision on sending them? Because the other thing you don't want to do is be late in sending them. If somebody's critically unwell and you've sat on it for 15-20 minutes waiting for that first ambulance to get there, and actually they then call up and say this person is really critically unwell, you're absolutely right, it can make you kind of judge whether you've made the right decision or not.
Yeah, but I'd also counter that with, it's clear that you've got loads of experience as well, so I imagine that supports your decisions as well as probably your team around you as well.
Absolutely, and we don't get involved in, whilst I said to you it's in the back of my mind. For me, if I think the helicopter's needed, I will send it. I've got no qualms with the fact that that it's it may be stood down. I'd much rather send before and then find out that it's not required, as I think most of the clinicians I work with would much rather get mobile and then find out that it's not as given, which luckily happens on quite a few calls.
When I think about the sort of unique qualities of helicopter rescue, I think about a lot of what you were saying sounded like immediate response. There's a speed to it, but I also wondered, is it ever used for people that are in quite remote areas that ambulances can't get to?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really interesting point that I can elaborate on, because a lot of people think that the air ambulance, when we fly out, will automatically be the conveying resource, the resource that takes that person to hospital. And that's absolutely not always the case. You hit the nail on the head there. It's all about speed, getting a enhanced team out to an incident. So that's kind of where the air ambulance is such a valuable resource, is the fact that you can get anywhere within our region within 25 minutes. So its speed is phenomenal for that. And when we get to scene, it's not actually that often that we will end up conveying the patient in the aircraft. Obviously, you can imagine that the aircraft space is rather limited. Whilst the 145 helicopter we've got is a brilliant aircraft and it allows us to get to most of the patient in flight, it's still not as spacious as being able to stand up in the back of an ambulance. So actually, sometimes the most critically unwell patients, we can obviously stabilise once the crew have got there, but then make the decision to go by road to the nearest hospital. So a lot of the time we will actually still convey in the ambulance, but the aircraft's used to get the crew there. You made a good point about remote access, and that is one time when the aircraft does come into its own. So, for instance, I can think of quite a few times where remote access has been a problem, such as on beaches, where an ambulance physically can't get there. Marshland, etc., and all of them are times where you probably would be able to use the platform, such as the helicopter, to then fly that patient back to hospital. The biggest thing that the aircraft also brings, as well as the critical care team being able to kind of get to scene quickly, is getting the patient to the correct hospital. So, for instance, if you were involved in a bad road traffic collision down in Bedford, for instance, whilst your nearest hospital might be the local hospital, actually the hospital that might actually be the best hospital for you in terms of a major trauma hospital may be somewhere further away. So where I used to work in Norwich, for instance, which is about an hour and 15 minutes drive from Cambridge, the local hospital, the Norfolk and Norwich, is great at dealing with the majority of things. But if you were a major trauma patient, the best hospital is actually Addenbrooke's in Cambridge. So that's where, again, the helicopter can come into its own, because if we attend an incident in Norwich, we would bypass the local hospital and get the patient to the most definitive hospital straight away. So we would sometimes fly from Norwich to Addenbrooke's, which is the major trauma centre that has access to kind of neurosurgery and things that the Norfolk and Norwich doesn't have. So again, it's a transport platform to get the patient to the most appropriate hospital.
Mm-hmm. And there's no restrictions around funding or locality with that?
No, it does go out the window, which is good in a way. I mean, so for instance, occasionally we will get pulled, especially on Cambridge base, across into other areas. So South Central Ambulance Service, which are kind of the neighbouring service to us down in Oxford and Bicester way, they asked for our assistance a couple of months ago on a night mission because their aircraft doesn't fly at night. So we actually flew towards Oxford, picked the patient up there, and then actually went into the John Radcliffe Hospital, which is a hospital that's definitely not on our patch. So yeah, barriers and kind of county lines do seem to get broken down a bit, and that's why you'll find Essex and Hertfordshire Air Ambulance coming into Cambridge going into Norfolk coming into in Bedford area. So we really do cover quite a large area between the different charities.
And going back to what you're saying about the content, I'm looking at the picture behind you and I am wondering what is inside there. How much room is there? Is there 2 pilot seats? Is there loads of gear and kit? And how can you sort of let me know about what's inside there?
Yeah, absolutely. So East Anglian Air Ambulance operate a 2-pilot strategy. So some aircraft, if you watch the helicopter emergency medic programs on TV, you'll see are staffed by just 1 pilot. And then in that situation, the paramedic becomes the second person in the front of the aircraft to assist in navigation. There's pros and cons to both. So obviously with 1 pilot, there's obviously, I guess, a cost-saving factor there. And the crew weight would be less as well. So you'd only have 3 members of crew. You'd have the pilot, the paramedic, and the doctor. The problem that some services have found is that the paramedic is obviously so enthralled in getting the helicopter to the scene and so responsible for helping the pilot navigate and fault find any issues that come up, etc., that they can't start to process what they may be going to. So an example would be if I was now heading out to a paediatric patient, as a paramedic, I would be discussing with the doctor in the back all of the different calculations that we need to do in terms of drugs and equipment that make a difference between an adult-sized patient and a paediatric-sized patient. And some of the calculations are quite complex. And obviously, if you're sat in the front seat of the helicopter, responsible at that point solely on the flight aspect or the aviation aspect, then obviously you can't turn your mind to things that you're thinking about on scene. And then obviously when you do rock up, you're then suddenly on the back foot a bit. The dual pilot role that we've adopted, I have to say, I think works really, really well. So we have a captain and a co-pilot on every shift. and they take it in turns to fly the different legs of the missions. And it basically means that they're solely responsible for the aviation side. We are medical passengers, if you like, in the back, who can be responsible for kind of discussing what we're going to do when we get to scene. And I think it's good because there's no kind of crossover there. In terms of space in the back, I guess the biggest issue is getting to the lower limbs, and also on the right, getting to the right hand side of the patient. So the stretcher is positioned up against the left hand side of the aircraft if you're looking at it from the tail, which means that when the patient is lying head in, access to the right hand side is relatively restricted. Space, as you alluded to there, with kit can be an issue. So on the way to jobs, we have a lot of the kit on the stretcher, strapped in where the patient would normally be sitting or lying. And obviously, if we're then conveying a patient by air, we have to kind of find a space for that kit. And that inevitably means that it goes to the back of the aircraft, which means that you do have to kind of preempt what equipment you may need during the flight into hospital. Because once you've kind of tucked it all out of the way, because obviously we're harnessed in, it's then nigh on impossible to get to the equipment and get it out. So that's an interesting point that you don't have with an ambulance mission, would be the fact that you have to kind of, as I said, preempt what you may need before you've actually left scene to go in. In terms of space, obviously we can't stand up, so a lot of the time we're kneeling in the back of the aircraft. But equipment-wise, it has everything that a normal kind of road ambulance would have on it, but obviously the enhanced skills that we can bring. So the biggest things that we bring as an air ambulance that a normal ambulance doesn't have are enhanced pharmacy. So basically that means enhanced drugs that we can give. And they may be drugs for pain relief. They may be drugs to kind of help sedate a patient if they're very anxious, or if they're in a lot of pain and we need to relocate limbs and things. And then obviously we can use sedation to kind of help that and make sure they're relaxed and they don't necessarily remember the pulling of horrible broken limbs, etc. We can also, the biggest extended skill that we can bring is anesthetic capability. So ambulance crew on the roads unfortunately don't have the option to kind of knock a patient out, if you like, which has various benefits for lots of different medical and traumatic causes. But as working with a doctor, as a level 3 team, we have that option. So going back to the example I gave earlier, if we've got a horrifically injured patient in Norwich and we need to fly them to Addenbrooke's, we can give them a general anaesthetic, knock them out, take over their breathing, and really kind of maximise their physiology to help get them to the right hospital, which a normal crew unfortunately would not be able to do. One of the things that, interestingly, I didn't think about when I applied for the job, another thing that the air ambulance brings is actually just we call it the crew resource management. And it's basically how we kind of interact with the scene and help the scene along. So most ambulance crews will probably see a big traumatic job probably once or twice a year, maybe. So the way that the ambulance service has moved now, they see a lot more medical cases. And it means that when they do come across traumatic incidents, sometimes, they can need a little bit of support from us, and it's all about how we engage with them and help them through. And so a lot of the time we're just bringing soft skills, good communication skills, helping them arrive at the same decisions that we want to arrive at, but without feeling like we're pressurizing them into taking over, if you like. So a lot of it is how we respond to both patients, relatives and crew on scene, and I think that's something that the air ambulance does bring quite well to scenes of incidents.
Yeah, something you alluded to, I'm curious about. What was your experience of transitioning from your ground-based four-wheel ambulance to something that flies?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd be lying if I said I don't think it's every paramedic's kind of dream, seen as the pinnacle of their career almost, to end up on the air ambulance, I would say. Everybody sees it as kind of being at the top of your A game, and I'm not ashamed to say that it took me 3 or 4 attempts to actually get here, and I cannot fault the application process that I went through on the times that I was unsuccessful. It was fair, it was good. They basically threw the kitchen sink at you, and you came out knowing that you perhaps hadn't done as well as you'd hoped for on that one. And every time I was unsuccessful, I learned from my mistakes, made sure that I went away, studied harder, prepared more, got involved a lot more with the charity, doing extra things. And then when it finally came around to, as I said, over about a year ago, I felt prepared, and actually going into that assessment phase to get the job, which is a 4-stage assessment, I felt that generally, it sounds a bit cliche, but it was the right time in my career. In terms of transitioning, so we get involved in a lot more training. So when we first started, we had kind of a 2 or 3 week boot camp, learning kind of all the additional pharmacology skills and helicopter operations that we obviously need to be able to do. We're obviously blessed with the fact that we work alongside a team of amazing doctors, all of which are more than happy on shift to run through different scenarios, simulations, talk through cases. We have a weekly discussion around jobs that we've attended, where the consultants will come on board and give their opinions on things. So we're constantly learning. Even though I've been doing it a year, I would by no means say that I feel as though I've learned everything there is to know about pre-hospital medicine. It's an ongoing thing, and every day, I'll speak to the doctor I'm working with and say, "Oh, can we just talk through something that we perhaps haven't seen for a few months, just to keep it kind of fresh in our heads." But yeah, transition-wise, it is a big step up. The responsibility is a lot bigger with the drugs that we carry and the skills that we are allowed to do. But like I said, it's definitely something that I always wanted to kind of head towards.
The sense of team really shines through with what you're saying as well.
Absolutely, and that is the biggest thing. I obviously spend most of my days dealing with the clinical side of, along with the doctors and the pilots. But, I'm also very aware of, all the community fundraisers that we have out there, all of the operations team, everybody plays the part. And I definitely see myself as kind of like a small cog in a big machine. Whilst, yes, we're the ones on the front line who see the patients, if it wasn't for the fundraisers or, the people who are out there, shaking the buckets to get the money, we wouldn't be out there doing what we're doing. So yeah, absolutely. There's definitely a really good camaraderie here, between everyone, and chief exec, etc. Will happily come and sit and have a chat with us, whenever they're on base, etc. So yeah, it really is a nice team ethos here.
Yeah. You mentioned fundraising there, and I want to come back to that, but I just want to go into something that you said about the application process and the mistakes, for want of a better word, that you made, and then you went back and you kind of learned from them. I think the word resilience popped into my head because it's something that we convey a great deal to our NCS participants about struggle, about things that you find difficult, and the option to give up is one of those options. But the other option is, okay, look at what you did wrong and find out and do the research or increase your knowledge base or whatever's needed for you to be able to succeed. And I was wondering if you'd be okay giving one of those things that you maybe came up short on that you then went and addressed and came back.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the way that the assessment works is kind of like I said, a 4-stage assessment. So first of all is you get shortlisted from a huge application pile. So for my position, there was 2 positions when I was successful last year, and I believe there was close to either 120 applicants initially. Now this was whittled down to 60 in the application phase. So a couple of times before, I'd been unsuccessful just through what I'd written on my CV and how I'd worded my my personal statement, if you like. So I remember a few years ago really sitting down with somebody and who helped me kind of go through my personal statement, look at the job description, and kind of make sure that I was putting in, I had lots of evidence. It was just a case of, in my initial application, I probably hadn't documented it or evidenced it. So it was literally a case of going through the job description and making sure that for every kind of point that the air ambulance charity were looking for, I could come up with something that kind of showed that I met that specification, if you like. Once through the application phase, we had to sit an exam, and actually both times I got through the exam stage absolutely fine, and that's obviously just a standard, knowing that you're going to have to study hard for it for a few weeks beforehand, and that actually getting it down onto paper, although very nerve-wracking, was actually something that I was successful with both times. The time that I was unsuccessful was the following stage after that, which was the simulation stage I talked about, and it's an interesting one because obviously you're a paramedic on the road. They can't test you on anything that's going to be expected of you when you're flying as an air ambulance paramedic. So it's a normal standard paramedic scenario, but the way in which they do that is they throw in stressful scenarios within that. So an example I can give you was that it was a standard cardiac arrest where the patient was not breathing and needed some management from us. But they threw in, as part of the scenario, and this was to everybody, a disruptive ambulance crew. So whilst if you said to me now, go and demonstrate how to deal with a patient in cardiac arrest, I could pretty much do it with my eyes shut, for want of a better term. But you throw in a disruptive ambulance crew who are deliberately been briefed to be, hard work, in the fact that, which is surprising. You think that, why would they be like that? But historically, there has been, some instances, and that's where it comes down to crew resource management of some people feeling, when the helicopter rocks up, why are they trying to, take away what I'm doing? What do they think they can bring that I can't do, etc.
Who do they think they are in their bird in the sky? Bit of that.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, exactly. Who do they think they are? Have they, they think they've got their
swinging
their Superman pants on the outside of their outfit. And it really threw me because I knew how to deal with this scenario, but when you've got a crew who are literally arguing the toss, for want of a better word, that's all they were actually looking at. And I remember speaking to a good friend of mine who also works for the charity afterwards, and he said that, because my thought process was all focused on dealing with the medical side of it, but actually what the charity were looking at was our communication strategy with the crew, how we, got them on board, how we dealt with the conflict, if you like, that we were receiving. Whether it was a case that they were worried, they'd been briefed that they were basically just out of their comfort zone. So it was like how we included them in the running of the scenario, but kind of didn't exclude them as well. So communication factors. So on that particular scenario, like I said earlier, there was no way that I could be angry at the fact that I'd been unsuccessful, because it was a standard paramedic skill that I could do day in, day out. The actual thing that I went away and realised that I wasn't particularly good at was dealing with underconfident, stressed, angry, difficult bystanders or ambulance crew who were on scene. And so to do that, I went away and started to really think about how I approached my colleagues when I was working on the ambulance at the time. And in the year or so between the application processes, really kind of made a kind of conscious thought about how I interacted with people on scene who may be for want of a better word, just under severe stress, and therefore being a little bit difficult, if you like. But yeah, really simple fix there, going away and just practicing and drilling, dealing with difficult situations. And then, as I said, the second time, luckily, with a similar scenario with a difficult crew, I was able to kind of get them on board and progress the scenario through to a kind of logical conclusion. Was
part of the difficulty because you hadn't really experienced that before? Because you talked about being in good teams and... Yeah,
absolutely. I think you're right, and I'm very lucky, touch wood, that since doing HEMS, I've not experienced like an absolute, disregard of us arriving. Most crews are absolutely happy to see us because they know that they need the help. And whether this is a historical thing, like I said, I've not seen it. I don't know, but anecdotally, you hear kind of old wives' tales of crews literally shutting the door and trying to drive away from the ambulance crew because the air ambulance crew, apologies, because they're focused on getting the patient to hospital, but maybe they haven't thought about the fact that the air ambulance crew could offer, like we said earlier, a better hospital outcome, or different hospital or different transport.
I think that sounds like a really interesting exercise in where your focus goes, because I've got a touch of autism, and I've got a sort of thing where if I zero in on a thing, I lose my peripheral vision a bit,
Yeah.
not necessarily physically, but also sort of mentally as well. And it sounds like an exercise that's geared around like opening that up a bit and taking perspective.
You are absolutely right. Yeah, and we have I can't remember. We obviously we have a couple of scenarios which kind of relate to that in the emergency. So, like, becoming red misted, we call it. So, like you said, task focused on one thing and then failing to take in peripheries. And there's lots of studies that have been done that the more complex the task and the more that communication starts to dwindle, that's when you start to not communicate your decisions well, and things do get missed. And that is exactly one of the things that we are drilled on constantly here, is trying to keep, we call it our bandwidth open. Yeah, absolutely. So, if you're task focused on, say, managing somebody's airway, which is obviously important for them to help breathing, but you're failing to notice that the junior ambulance technicians kind of saying to you, have you noticed that he's still bleeding from that wound, or that wound looks a little bit dodgy, guys, I really think that wound's bleeding quite heavily now, you need to now actually deal with this. And if you're still just focusing on the one thing, you're not listening to perhaps what somebody outside's saying. So yeah, it's again a really important skill which we're kind of drilled into us. But yeah, definitely something they were looking for on the assessment day, having the bandwidth to kind of take on board what was going on.
Yeah, I think I might use that in the future when the team think I might have zoned in on something. I'm task focusing. All right.
Yeah, exactly.
To move back to the NCS. Thank you. That's been fascinating, actually. Yeah, with the NCS, the sort of format going forward is a more digital focused one. We're still expecting teams of young people that want to do some good in their community, whether there's a lockdown or not. So I'm wondering if you've got any ideas on how they might be able to be supporting Eaaa. As an NCS provider, we always try to move away from fundraising. I know that's a common focus with charities, but we like to think a bit more outside the box about how what other things can be, what other assistance could be given. Have you got any ideas?
I mean, I've got obviously some fundraising ones, but I like the higher idea of your idea outside the box. And thinking outside the box, the biggest thing that I would suggest to anyone, including the NCS, is undertaking some type of a first aid course is ideal. So just being first aid trained and CPR trained is so important. So again, an interesting fact from us is a lot of people think that the biggest call that we attend on the helicopter is road traffic collisions and trauma. Actually, that's not the case. It's medical cardiac arrest. So for those of you that just need some clarification on that, a cardiac arrest is where somebody stops breathing and their heart stops. So this could be a 20-year-old who's running around a football field on a Sunday morning, or it could be an 80-year-old in a home who's had a heart attack and suddenly collapsed. So the variety of patients that we attend in cardiac arrest is obviously varied, but it's the biggest call that we attend. Now, to get the best outcome, and obviously the best outcome for a patient in cardiac arrest is being able to walk out of hospital with all of their faculties intact, so fully neurologically intact, back to a quality of life they had before the collapse. Now, unfortunately, in the UK, at the moment, that's not always happening. So basically, only 40% of people who have a cardiac arrest out of hospital get any form of bystander CPR. So having somebody recognise that their heart has stopped and to start the resuscitation process, only 40% of them are getting that started. The other important part is once you've started the CPR is being able to use a defibrillator, which is the electronic shock box, which some of your guys might have seen on the walls of supermarkets, community centres, in old phone boxes, etc. They're popping up everywhere. And only 20% of cardiac arrests that we go to have a kind of a bystander defibrillator applied. Now, CPR, defibrillation, and early access to an ambulance are 3 of the 4 parts of what we call the chain of survival. Okay, so to get the best outcome for a patient, they need to have as 4 elements of the chain of survival, and that's early access to 999. So it relies on somebody finding them early and recognizing they're sick and calling for the ambulance and getting the ambulance to them. The second part is early bystander CPR, so buying time before that ambulance arrives. Okay, we would obviously turn up to any cardiac arrest and attempt resuscitation, but we know that if it's taking us 20 to 30 minutes to get there and that patient's not been receiving any CPR, then actually the chances of survival are very, very slim. Even if we get their heart restarted, they've had 20 to 30 minutes where they haven't been getting oxygen to the brain, and therefore, unfortunately, they're probably never going to be able to walk out of hospital, and certainly not back to a level that they were prior to the collapse. Early bystander CPR trebles the chances of surviving a cardiac arrest, okay? And with early use of defibrillator, the survival rates go from about 2% up to 40 to 70%, so a really marked improvement. And that's the biggest thing that we're trying to push at the moment, is getting people just being comfortable with doing it. I think in days gone by, people were scared that they'd do the wrong thing, scared that they'd cause more harm than good. But actually, doing something is better than nothing. And bearing in mind that when they phone for the ambulance, they're going to have the support of a qualified call handler on the end of the phone who will be helping them and talk them through it, and assisting them. It really is something that we're focusing in on, is trying to get the out of hospital survival cardiac arrest figure up, especially as it's the biggest call out we go to. So thinking outside the box, I would suggest, it's great for CVs as well. So a lot of companies really look favourably if you've got the first aid at work certificate, which is the kind of the qualification that you could gain. It's great for becoming more confident in dealing with situations. A lot of people who attend first aid at work courses hopefully will never have to deal with a cardiac arrest situation, but they may have to deal with cuts, seizures, allergic reactions, etc., all of which is covered. So yeah, I liked your idea of thinking outside the box. I would suggest trying to get involved in some first aid CPR. In terms of volunteering, if first aid was something they were interested in, then there's always the St John's ambulance scheme, where they will allow you to go to meetings and attend duties to do first aid. But coming back from an air ambulance perspective, we are obviously always looking to kind of branch out and extend our fundraising. And obviously at the moment, the problem we've got is with the coronavirus. Obviously a lot of our big income streams from the events that we run have obviously had to be put on hold. So some of your members may have heard of Only the Brave, which is a kind of a big muddy obstacle course which they run yearly at Thetford. So it's great fun. A lot of people sign up to do it. It's got a lot of hard obstacles. It's a bit like the Tough Mudder, if you like, of the region, and that's one of our biggest kind of income streams, and unfortunately again because of corona that had to be shelved this year. But Trek 24 in Bedfordshire is coming next year as well, and this will probably mean a bit more to you guys than it will to me, but it's a 24-kilometre or 24-mile walk around the Chilterns, the Chiltern area there, and again that was supposed to be happening this year but has been kiboshed until September 21. But in terms of things your guys could help out with there, either just attending it to if they fancy, if they're happy, if they like walking or running, etc., then they could obviously attend it as a participant. But if not, then we're always looking for people to hand out refreshments, help with car parking, cheer on participants, etc. So non-direct fundraising roles, they're always looking for people to kind of help out with that. Wave the flag for Eaaa, if you like. And if any of your members are interested, then they can always get in touch with the contact that you've got, Adam, and they'll be able to signpost you for anything. But we're always looking for volunteers, not necessarily just to shake buckets and rake in money, but yeah, lots of activities to get involved in, hopefully when the coronavirus kind of dies down.
And then that's suitable for age 16 and 17, the volunteering?
I believe so, yeah, absolutely. I think I can't see any reason why not. You'd have to obviously check with the charity, but yeah, I can't see any reason why helping out, handing out refreshments or car parking, etc. Yeah, I can't see any reason why that would be, but yeah, you just need to check with the charity on that. I don't know that.
There's some sort of interesting indirect stuff there as well. You mentioned about the defibrillators, and as much as we've been channeling young people away from fundraising, we do still consider it quite acceptable to generate money to buy something for someone or an organisation or so on. So I wonder about any projects that might put defibrillation machines around. I'm also thinking of the advocacy side of things about the importance of first aid training, and actually it's not so scary. You're going to get advice on the phone, that kind of taking some of the sting out of it. And I'm proud to say that I think over the last 3 years that we as a provider have sourced funding to allow all of our participants to have first aid training.
Excellent. That's brilliant.
Yeah, so they'd be coming with that sort of experience and that knowledge, and then being able to carry that forward, I think would be really positive. And obviously from a promotional point of view, I guess getting the sort of Eaaa out there and anything like that they can do. Maybe.
Absolutely. So, like in terms of the defibrillator, like you mentioned, like if you decided that was an avenue that you wanted to go down, then we have a designated critical care paramedic who also does the community teaching on how to use it, etc. So it'd almost be kind of like almost an upgrade for your members who are first aid trained already, and because using a defibrillator is as easy as riding a bike, really. Again, people worry that they're going to do the wrong thing, but if push came to shove, you'd have the call taker on the other end of the phone who would talk you through how to use it. But actually, there's not too much that you can do wrong with it. So yeah, that sounds like a brilliant idea. Looking at community areas that don't perhaps have a defibrillator, and maybe looking to source one, and then perhaps inspiring that with some training for your guys as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And do you ever need volunteers for the scenarios you mentioned? Could we have a group of young people that can pretend to be really ill? And
Oh, absolutely. I cannot see any reason why. It's normally played by people who've been roped in on their days off, doctors and paramedics, and we do run scenarios frequently. So yeah, that's definitely something I hadn't thought.
That'd be a fun one.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got people who absolutely are brilliant at doing all the makeup and things, and can make fake wounds, fake things. And I think regularly they run courses around the area for the doctors that come through. So we have a rotation of doctors that come in quite frequently, and they always are doing high fidelity, so very realistic simulations at various places. So yeah, that's definitely something that you could perhaps liaise with our clinical team about, and yeah, definitely be moulaged up. That's a very good point. It'd be interesting for your guys. Mm-hmm. And I know in previous organisations I've worked for, we've definitely used college participants and things. So again, you'd have to probably just speak to Eaaa, but I'm sure they'd probably bite your hand off for
I can imagine, like, we've got groups of 16, like a group of 16-year-olds that just sort of turn up and go, we want to be I want to be a cardiac arrest person. Exactly. I want to be bleeding out the stomach.
Oh, brilliant. And you're right, because some of the scenarios that we go to, they require a little bit of acting, shall we say, and I'm sure some of the 17-year-olds would be brilliant at that. So yeah, I think that's a good thing you could definitely explore.
Okay, nice one. This is why I like these conversations, because quite a lot of ideas, and this would be what our young people would have been doing if we did the actual event. They'd be talking to you one-to-one, and those kind of ideas would formulate as well. So I always see it as a meeting between the ambitions of the young people and actually what can be possible within an organisation. There's a nice spot that you can sort of hang out there and get creative, I think. It's been great talking to you, man. One of the things I do love doing is talking to people that are experts in their field. These people, I think of like your day to day, and I think, wow, like get on a helicopter, go. And you talk about it quite casually because you're probably quite used to it / desensitized to it now, but it's so far removed from mine and probably a lot of people's lives out there, that the way that you kind of do your work, and I imagine it to be quite rewarding as well. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Dave.